One of the brilliant things about group policy, I think, is that you're never in a situation where there are conflicting values. And that's because group policy always has a prescribed set of rules which determine which is the winning value. Now, group policies are a little bit more complex in some respects because they can contain thousands of settings. And it's only those settings that are configured with different values at different levels, so at the domain, at the OU, and so forth, where there's likely to be a conflict. So if you don't use the same settings in two different containers, there's not a conflict. But where you've configured the same value, then in multiple elements of the hierarchy, you could end up with a conflicting setting. But what happens is that group policy uses these rules to determine which setting wins. So it's the most specific setting that wins by default, but there are other rules as well. Net result of that is that you might end up, if you've configured things incorrectly, with not the expected results, not what you expected to see, but you've got no conflicts to deal with. And then you have to work out why you're not seeing what you expected to see. Things are behaving in a different way, or settings aren't what they ought to be. And then you can, figure that out. But that's not a conflict. That's where you've got different settings that have different values that have applied in the prescribed rule set that is used by group policy. Now, things don't work in quite the same way in Intune. Luckily, each of the settings are more specific. So having a Wi-Fi profile, configuration profile, and one for setting up an email account, they're not going to conflict with each other because they're totally unrelated. But device restrictions profiles, where you have several of them, or settings that appear in an administrative template but also appear in a device restriction profile, that's a possible area of conflict. You need to be aware that Intune highlights that there are conflicts, but it doesn't attempt to resolve them beyond sort of a fairly basic level. So if you are interested in what's going on with your profile, view things from a variety of standpoints. You can take a look at a particular device and then look at how it's configured and then highlight the configuration profiles that were used and then, take it from there. Or you can start at the configuration profile end and work your way back to the particular devices that are having problems. Whichever way it's, whatever works for you is the way to proceed. So we've got here a situation on the screen here where we have a couple of users have errors, and we can see that that's increasing. Was one increase per week, so it was 2 users and now 3 devices, and there are some policies with errors or conflicts, and we need to investigate those. So we'll take a look at this in a demonstration in a moment, but all you'd need to do is click the links to find out a bit more information. On a particular profile, here we're looking at one for device restrictions. We can see that it's been configured on one device successfully, or one user successfully rather, and 2 users have conflicts, or 2 devices have conflicts, depending on how you want to look at it. It actually splits that out for you, because remember, the same user might have several different devices, as is the case here. One user has 2 devices, another user has 1. So for one of the user devices, we've got a success. For one of the user devices, we have a failure, and the other user also a failure. So we need to work out what the problem is. It identifies it rather than as an error, as a conflict. It could be that a setting is not applicable to a given situation, or it could be that it's pending, so you've just made a change and it hasn't yet applied, so it will refresh in the next 8 hours or whatever, although obviously you can accelerate that if you need to. So there's quite a lot of information going on here to help you identify the problem. Common issues that you might find are when 2 profile settings are applied to the same device, the most restrictive value is applied. So any settings that are the same in each policy are applied as configured. If a policy is deployed to a device and is active when a second policy is deployed, then the first policy takes precedence and stays applied. Any conflicting settings are set to the most restrictive values though. So if you use that the first policy stays applied except for where there are conflicts, in which case the most restrictive setting applies, you should be pretty good. Different types of policy interact with each other. Compliance policy settings take a precedence over configuration profile settings. If a compliance policy includes the same setting found in another compliance policy, the most restrictive compliance policy setting is applied. So again, the most restrictive, always worth remembering. If a configuration policy setting conflicts with a setting in another configuration policy, the conflict is displayed and you must resolve the conflict, unlike with group policy where there is never a conflict, so there's nothing to resolve. You can use the troubleshooting portal if you can't think of any other way of resolving it. Here we've selected a particular user, Adele, and we're looking at what the configuration state is. So you can see at the very bottom, for example, there's an application that's waiting to deploy out to a particular device. It's pending. So you get quite a lot of information about what's going on. So you get user status, assignments of profiles and policies, and compliance issues. In the demonstration, I'm going to go through how you can review your various profiles and identify conflicts. So we're in the Intune Admin Center again, and even on the homepage, you can see immediately there are some policies with errors or conflicts, and I can select those and follow the link, and it will take me to those devices and start to enable me to troubleshoot them if I want to. Again, also I've got some heads up here about errors and failures, and then healthy information about other devices. I can go to the dashboard and I can get different information. You can customize your dashboard, but even here we've got device configuration tile with errors, with policies with error or conflict. And again, I can click that link and follow it to try to identify the issue. If I scroll down, I can see some more information about the device configuration profile, and we can see that there are errors. And again, I can click that link and follow it. So straight away, without having to really drill down too far, I get some basic information. So if I go to a particular device and take a look at it from the device end of things and choose Contoso Adele, I can scroll down here and look at, let's say, device configuration, and it tells me all of the settings that have been applied from the different configuration profiles, but it tells me that DevRes1 and private store only are in conflict with one another. So that's probably the source of the error. I can also take a look at it from the device configuration profile end. So let's go to configuration profiles and then choose DevRes1. And we can see that 2 are successful, there are no errors, but there are 2 conflicts. So again, it's showing me the same information. Whichever way I look at it, it's coming up and identifying the same issue, which is really helpful. So whichever way I want to attack this, from the device configuration end or from the physical device end, it's up to me. So I'm going to try and find out about what the cause of the problem is. So if I go to my devices and I choose Contoso Adele, so Adele's machine here, and I have a look at the device configuration again, and I'm going to choose that configuration there and look at use private store only in conflict and choose that. It's telling me it's conflicting with DevRes1. So I've got a couple of different profiles in conflict here. Let's see what they're all about. So if I now go back to my configuration profiles, I know which ones I'm looking for, and this is a deliberate intention on my part to leave this as an ongoing issue so I can show students how to get around the issue, or at least how to identify the issue. I originally set up the private store only custom profile because there was no way of doing or configuring private store settings other than by using a custom profile, and that was some time ago. Now I can do it using a device restriction profile. That's a functionality that's been added. So let's look at the private store only, and if we take a look at the settings, it's not really telling us very much here, but it's configuring require private store only, so that's fine. Now let's take a look at, let's go back here, okay, and go back to the configuration profile list here and go to DevRes1 and take a look at its settings down the bottom here. And if I expand out App Store, you can see that it's configured use private store only. And so that's the conflict. What didn't used to be possible now is, and I've configured it and it's complaining about it. And so as a consequence, I've got that conflict that I would need to resolve. So obviously the easy thing to do is to edit one or other of these and then to configure it, or alternatively to go back. In this particular instance, I think the simplest solution is to unassign the private store only, since it's only doing one thing. So if I unassigned it, allowed time for the devices to synchronize themselves, then the conflict would go away. In the demonstration, you learned how to review profile status.